Recording in progress.
Hey, folks, we're going to get started in just a minute. We have people signing into the Zoom right now. This is a hybrid meeting, so we're crossing our fingers that all the technology works properly. And so the people on Zoom can see both the screen that you see, as well as the polling that we'll do. And I think we're just letting people sign in right now, so just give us a minute as I'm seeing the numbers climb, and then we'll get started. I don't know if you do. I can. Yeah, I just see names of people. Yeah, yeah.
So if someone's going to speak, if they're on camera, will they be up on the screen?
If they, at the end, oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
sorry. The way we worked the forum last time is we used the chat feature to take questions from the public. So they are viewing this as a webinar. It's not a live engagement session for them in any other form except the chat.
Although I think there is a way at the end, particularly the open Q&A, they can ask to speak and we can let them speak at that time. But I don't think they ever do the screen. It's just they can verbally speak or do chat at the end. There are 14 people currently on the Zoom. I just put a link to the resources in the chat, and I'm going to try to put a link to the poll everywhere. So.
All right. Well, I think we should get started, Ryan. And I don't know, I know you have a few announcements to make first.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. So thank you everyone for attending in person and via the Zoom webinar format if you're with us tonight. We're joined tonight by our Housing Production Plan Consultant team, Laura Smead and Jen Goldson of JM Goldson. Thank you. Should I repeat that? Let's take two. So for the benefit of people listening at home or on the webinar, thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Ryan Bennett. I'm the town's housing production or housing coordinator. We're joined tonight by Jen Goldson and Laura Smead of JM Goldson, who are the consultant team leading our housing production plan update effort. I want to thank Councilors Starr, Shaughnessy, and Schnepp for joining us tonight. I believe that there was some information distributed by our friends in advocacy this past week that characterized this as the County of Barnstable Housing Production Plan. I just want to clarify for anyone that is here or attending via webinar that this is the Town of Barnstable Housing Production Plan. So just managing expectations at the outset. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jen and Laura to start the presentation.
Yeah, we're really happy to be here, and I know we have some folks here in the room, and then we have folks online. It looks like we have 17 participants right now online, and hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So if folks online could just put in the chat that we're coming in loud and clear, and that you can see our presentation, that would be really helpful just as a confirmation. And all of you can hear me okay, right? Okay, good. All right, great. Well, we're really happy to be here. Laura and I started working on this project a number of months ago. And what I'm going to do is just run you through what we've done so far. And then we're going to talk through goals and strategies that are in draft form that we really want your feedback on. The project team we've been working with are members of the Housing Committee. And could members who are here in person just stand if there are any members of the Housing Committee in person? Okay. Okay, we don't have members in person. Could any members of the Housing Committee who are online just post in the chat to everyone? There's a way to change from just posting messages to host and panelist to posting to everyone. So if you, oops, I didn't mean to do that. If you can post to everyone, then we will be able to see who's here from the committee. So, but you can see the names listed there. We've also been working really closely with Ryan Bennett, who is here, Housing Coordinator for Barnstable, Elizabeth Jenkins, who is also here, Director of Planning and Development, and then Kate Maldonado. Did I catch her name right? Yeah. And she was here just a moment ago. She's right there. Yeah. And then I'm Jen Goldson. I'm a planning consultant. We do a lot of housing work, housing plans, housing production plans, help with housing trusts, as well as comprehensive master plans and helping with implementing housing initiatives like writing RFPs for town property and things like that. So we're really happy to be here. We've done quite a bit of work on Cape Cod, in different Cape communities around housing needs, and currently we're working in Harwich, Wellfleet, and Truro, and Barnstable on housing initiatives and housing plans. This is just the project schedule. We started over the summer. We started with just trying to understand from doing interviews and focus groups, what are the main needs. We worked on your plan about 5 years ago, and we wanted to try to understand what's changed. There's a lot that has not changed about your housing needs, and we just wanted to get an understanding of that over the summer. And then we created the first few chapters of the Housing Production Plan, which we presented a few months ago at the first community forum, that were findings around housing needs. And I'm just wondering if folks online could raise their hand of who attended that original forum.
I got a message that the chat is disabled.
That's weird.
Zooming in. We can't write in the chat.
Okay, could you try to go on Zoom and, all right, we're gonna try to enable that.
I'm not sure that I can, because I can't, if it was created under Alana's account.
Oh, I can do it, all right.
Okay.
Attendees can now chat with everyone, I just changed it. Okay, thank you for alerting me. Okay, so back to my question. Could people just put in the chat or raise your hand if you're here in person, who was participated in the September 21st community forum that we presented housing needs? Okay, well, at least one person here. And then in the chat, I'm seeing one person. Oh, good. Okay, so a few of you were there, wonderful. And it looks like one person, Robert Schulte, is answering that they were also there. Great, okay, so a lot of you, it sounds like we're not there. So what I'd like to say is that since we're, it keeps doing that every time I mess around with Zoom. There we go. So what I'd like to encourage you to do is to look at that the draft work if you're interested in learning what we presented that night. We're not going to go into details of that tonight because we really want to get your opinions on draft strategy ideas and draft goals before we write that chapter of the plan next month. So we're going to gloss over needs. We're going to have like one slide on kind of the bottom line, but we're not going to get into all the data tonight as we just don't have the time to do all of that in one night. We also had a survey that closed in early November, and we've been working with the Housing Committee over a few different meetings, and then tonight we're doing the second community forum. To come, the next steps is that we'll be writing that last chapter of the housing production plan that consists of the goals and strategies over the course of the next month. And then in January, we'll be working with the Housing Committee to refine that. And then at the end of January, on January 23rd, there will be a joint meeting of the Planning Board and the Housing Committee. And we'll be, hoping the Planning Board will at least weigh in, if not vote to approve that night or recommend the plan. And then on February 17th, we'll meet with the we'll submit a revision based on any discussion that happened at that joint meeting. And they will take public comments at that joint meeting, so that's a good meeting for people to come out to again. And then we'll be revising and then having a final meeting on March 9th. So that's kind of the outline of the schedule. And I know you're working on a comprehensive master plan, a comprehensive plan at the same time as you're doing this work. And so hopefully people don't get confused over which meeting is about which project, but this is all about the housing plan. All right, and so tonight Laura's going to go through, I'm going to go through the goals, the draft goals, and then Laura will go through some select strategy ideas, but we want you to know that the handout has all of the ideas that we're looking at. And then Laura also posted in the chat for folks on Zoom a link to a variety of handouts, including this one. So if you want to see the list of all the strategies, there are, I think, 30 of them, which is why we couldn't go through every single one tonight. You'll have that list and can certainly comment on any of the strategies after the presentation. But during the presentation, we picked out just a few select ones that we thought warranted, some more robust feedback on to make sure that we're going in the right direction with those. All right. So, and I just want to say our style when we do presentations is if we say something that either makes no sense or is just wrong, you should tell us. We'd much rather be corrected or clarify if something's not clear in the middle of the presentation than to just do our whole presentation with folks confused or saying, that wasn't right. I'd much rather you correct us in the moment. But if you have, thoughts about them or any commentary, we'd like you to hold that to the end. Does that make sense and sound fair? Okay, great. All right, so this is all the different handouts that are available online. We didn't print them all for you, but we do have the Housing Needs Assessment, a summary of that bigger document. That's available online, and there is in your I think Laura posted the link to that already for the Zoom folks, but for the folks in the room, the very first page of this handout has a different QR code. So don't do it now because you'll ruin your, you're already all on poll everywhere, so don't do it quite yet. But later you can look at the other handouts and you can find them there. And so this is just a list of those handouts. There's a little summary of that needs assessment. There's the full list of the goals and strategies, which is the same document you have in print. And then there's the just an executive summary of the 2016 housing production plan, just so you can have a record of, what did we talk about 5 years ago, or I guess 6 years ago. We have some quick facts of what is the plan even. We are not going into a lot of detail on that tonight either. And then we just provided acronyms, key definitions, just so people have them in case you have those kinds of questions later on. There's Poll Everywhere instructions, which we will show on the screen in just a moment. And then we also have the Massachusetts Department of Housing and Community Development just has housing production plan guidelines, if anyone's interested. Sometimes people want a lot of information, so we provided it this way rather than going into it all in our presentation. All right, yes?
Is there a draft? You said you wrote a draft of the way things are now?
Yes.
Is that available?
Yes, and so the first on this list is just a summary of that document, but the full document, well, it's a draft of the housing production plan, and it's 3 chapters that have been written, which together are your housing needs assessment. So it's not a document that's called a housing needs assessment. I don't want to confuse people. It's the draft of the HPP, and it has the demographics chapter, the housing conditions chapter, and then a development constraints chapter. And that is, something that's been drafted. People can review. It's not on this list. I think, is it available on the website? Or if not, we could probably circulate that.
The housing
The,
needs
su-
summary?
just the HPP draft that's been done to date.
It's not on our website yet, but we can get it there.
Okay, good. All right. So now we're going to start out with some polling, and this is kind of a warm-up question, just so we can all make sure it's working and everything like that. But the folks in the room are, I think, mostly already on it. If you're not on it, there's a QR code that hopefully you have. If you're not on it and you want some help, Elizabeth or, I'm so sorry, I forget your name, Kate can help you get on that. And then for the folks online, you can set your browser to pollev.com/GenG. And I just want you to know the capitalized and lowercase doesn't matter when you're typing this in. We just did that so it's a little easier to read. But for the folks online, if you go into that URL on your browser, you can do it on your smartphone, on a tablet, or on the computer that you're watching this Zoom on, and just go to the link pollev.com/GenG. And I think, Laura, did you put that in the chat already?
Yep.
Perfect. So Laura put that link in the chat, and so you can go ahead and, where is it, up top maybe?
Yep, it's at the
Link to poll everywhere. If you scroll up in your chat, you can see the second message that Laura sent is link to poll everywhere, and there's the link right there. So hopefully folks are getting on. If you're having any trouble, just put it in the chat and we can try to help you troubleshoot. And then in the room, I can see if folks are having trouble and you can raise your hand. All right, good. So we also, the other ways you can participate tonight, we have the chat open, thanks to the folks who told us it wasn't open. And you can put your thoughts to panelists, and actually we opened it that you can put your thoughts into everyone participating on the Zoom. We also will facilitate dialogue at the end of our presentation, but during the presentation, we have a bunch of polling things to do. All right, great. And at the end, when we do the open Q&A, if folks on the Zoom want to say something, you just need to, raise your hand, and we can promote you to a panelist and let you unmute and use your video so that we can all see and hear you. And then the folks in the room will be a little more straightforward, and you can just raise your hand and we'll recognize you. All right, good. So let's move into the first polling exercise. Oh, and we also provided, I'm hoping that this is the correct QR code. Hopefully it is. If you have any issues with this on Zoom, let me know. But hopefully you've all gotten into that link already. If you want to text, for the folks on Zoom, you can also just text the number 22333. That's like a phone number if you want to text somebody. And then send the message GenG with 2 N's, JENNG. And if you send that message, you'll get a message back on your text platform that you have now joined GenG's polling. So hopefully, there's many ways to do this, so hopefully you'll all get in there. All right. So you've already started answering this. This is our warm-up question. We just want to know what village you currently live in. And folks are answering. I don't want to, you can see these results, hopefully, yeah. So you can see that we have a few folks who are saying they are not currently a resident of Barnstable, so that's about 27%. And my guess is that, maybe they represent other organizations or interest groups. And then we have, the numbers are changing a little bit right now, but we have about 23% from Hyannis, so that's the next highest group. And then you can see the rest are a little bit more spread out between going up and down a little, but Marston's Mills, Osterville. And then we have a few from Barnstable Village, a few from West Barnstable, and it looks like no one from Katuit, did I say it right? Good. All right, did everyone in this room get a chance to do the polling? Did it seem to be working on your phone? And nobody having trouble? Okay, great. And then Laura's manning, I think, the chat, or Ryan's manning the chat. Everyone seemed to be not indicating they have any troubles? Awesome, good. So we did it. Hybrid meetings, okay. All right, so now I'm going to go into the, if I can forward my slide. Not sure why it's not forwarding. We're going to go into, if I can move my slide forward, here we go, okay. So what is a housing production plan? So you're going to see this acronym HPP. It just means Housing Production Plan. And the reason we call it that rather than just a housing plan is that it's a tool that's recognized by the state. And if you have a housing production plan that meets all of the state requirements and you create a certain number of units in a given year, then you can enter something called safe harbor. And that's part of the reason why people do housing production plans, is to have some more control over comprehensive permit applications and the ability for the Zoning Board of Appeals to deny or put additional conditions on that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. But the other big reason to do it is to really understand, well, what is our local and our regional need, and how can we try to help solve these problems and be part of the solution, and then what kind of strategies can we put in place. And the communities, especially the communities on the Cape that we've worked in, seem to be a little less interested in, the safe harbor aspect of a housing plan, housing production plan, and a little more interested in how can we really help with these housing issues that we all feel and see in our community and in the region. And so, we talk about needs, we'll talk about goals, and then we'll talk about strategies. And we just wanted to define those a little bit. And so needs are really the top issues that we've identified working through the beginning part of this process. The goals are kind of overarching things like what kind of housing needs are you trying to solve? And when I read to you what the goals are, I think that'll make a little bit more sense. But they're conditions you're trying to solve or conditions you're trying to reach rather than actual ways you're going to do it. Is that making sense, at least in the abstract? Okay. And then the strategies are how are we going to do it? And, who's doing what and where does the money come from kind of follows those strategies. Sometimes they're zoning strategies, sometimes they're programs, sometimes they're local initiatives, local development initiatives, partnering with developers, partnering with other regional agencies, et cetera. And so those are the strategies. All right. I'm only going slow because my computer's not responding well. There we go. All right. So we just wanted to do a quick look back at the 2016 goals. And really, to be frank, they're quite similar to the ones we've come up with because your needs are very similar to what we looked at 6 years ago. The main differences are we've kind of grouped things in a different way and we've consolidated. You had a lot more goals back then. For some reason, when we wrote it, we decided to give you a lot of goals. And this time we've condensed them. But the main issues that we're talking about are the same. They're just worded a little different, sometimes with more fine details in your older plan and a little bit more generalized in this newer version. So that's the biggest change. And then some of the goals from your last plan, we kind of moved back into the strategies, like continue to monitor your existing units. We decided 6 years ago that's probably more of a strategy than a goal. So that's the main change. But substantively, I would say they're largely the same. Were any of you on Zoom, you can put in the chat, and then in the room, just raise your hand if you were involved in that 2016 planning effort. If anybody here was involved? No? Okay, can't remember that far back. Okay, so we have a new cast of folks here. All right, and then in the chat, Ryan, is anybody saying? Okay. All right, so we're going to start this new polling method here, and we're going to work with emojis. We're going to share I think there's 5 or 6 goals that we're going to share with you. And we just want to know, generally, do you like this idea? Do you not like it? Do you feel kind of neutral about it? Need more information? And so there's just a scale here. So the green smiley face is fully support this goal. And then the red frowny face is you really probably want it removed. And then you've got some shades of gray, or actually orange, yellow, and lighter green in the middle. So makes sense just in terms of, and this is going to come up on your phone, or whatever. If you're online, it'll come up on your browser in a minute. It's not there yet. I'm just teaching you how to use it. Yes.
In looking at the goals that have been proposed for us to look at, I wonder how they compare with other housing production plans. I don't see any real specific, numbers or anything, so it's really hard to know how I would even measure
Yeah.
achievement of these goals. Is this sort of how Barnstable's turned out, or is this sort of how a lot of housing production plans?
Yeah, it's a great question. And really, we work with the community to figure out what they're looking for. Some communities really want specific measurable goals, like how many units are we talking about? How many ownership? How many rental? How many workforce? And so we can do that kind of quantitative analysis. We're doing that in Truro and Wellfleet right now for their plans because they specifically wanted those numbers. But for most plans, I would say the communities are looking for something a little bit more general. And then they'll do as many units as they can. It's usually never enough. So it's a local preference, and we're happy to change the way we've done this if that's the preference of the community.
How is our preference determined?
Well, we've been working with the housing committee and town staff and kind of running through different draft goals. And I don't know that we've explicitly asked, do you want numbers or not? And so if that's something that the community here and on Zoom feels that would be helpful, then that would be good to know. Yeah.
One number we always do include, not necessarily in just the shorthand, just the first statement of the goal, but in the text that will follow when we write the chapter, is how many units you would be expected to produce as a part of, to get like safe harbor, or to produce as a part of the, 10%, achieving that 10% goal. But that's usually the only specific analysis you might do. But then right now, this is the list, it's a list of ideas. And when we get into the strategies in particular, those will all have narratives that will develop as a result of feedback that we hear from the community forum and other meetings with the housing committee and staff.
So if you can actually pull up, I don't know that it's in the presentation, how many units they would need. I think it doesn't say in this.
It doesn't say in
Yeah.
that.
So if you could just be prepped to answer that in just a moment, then we can at least give you that number. Yes,
421, that's what you said, September 21st.
thank you.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah, yeah. Yes. So Laura can pull up the safe harbor number. Yeah, it's 0.5% of your year-round housing stock, so we can get you that exact number as we're talking.
So for the benefit of the folks listening from home, when the public asks a question from the audience, if we can either repeat that or ask.
Oh, I'm sorry, of course, because you guys aren't mic'd. Okay. So the questions were around, can we incorporate any kind of metrics in these goals? And the answer is yes, if that's what the community wants us to do. And I think you probably gathered that from my answer. And then the other question was, what are the numbers to reach 10%? I actually asked that question, and a member of the audience answered, and it was 400 and, what did you say? I'm so sorry. 421 units needed to reach 10%. And then Laura's going to find the safe harbor numbers, which are 0.5% of the year-round housing units or 1%. If you produce 0.5% of the year-round housing units in one calendar year, you get a 1-year safe harbor. And if you produce 1% of the year-round housing units in a calendar year, then you get a 2-year safe harbor. And so Laura will get you those numbers in just a second.
My computer cooperates.
Okay, so the first goal is really about trying to get to that 10%, to reach and then maintain that 10% of your year-round housing units as affordable in the eyes of the state. And those units would then be counted on something that's called the subsidized housing inventory, which is just a list of all the units that the state counts as qualifying toward that 10% requirement. Can you guys raise your hands, and the folks on chat too, if you're generally familiar with what I'm talking about, or if that, raise your hand if you feel pretty familiar with that already. Okay, a lot of you, not everyone. So if I'm saying something that you're like, I'm not familiar with that and I really want more clarification, please do ask me. I really encourage you to do that. Yes, of course.
At what point can we actually stand up and talk about how we want to help here? I must be at the wrong meeting, because Bill here for 45 years,
Uh,
and I came with some proposals to actually build affordable housing. So is
Okay.
this the wrong forum for that?
Yeah, so we're talking about kind of more general strategies like zoning changes, any local initiatives, how do you use your CPA funding, your trust funding, things the city can do to help promote, or I'm sorry, the town.
I don't want to
Yeah,
change the meeting, we've been talking
Yeah.
about that for 10 years, and then 6 years ago, you had meetings.
yep,
The whole housing thing has just quadrupled there, so.
yeah.
Not responsible what's going on, it might not be the right forum, but when you were talking about everything in 2016, a $300,000 house here in the town of Barnstable is now $700,000. So that's, I might be at the wrong forum, and I can see everything that you have, but we have a serious crisis, so you can look at all these stats all you want, but we have kids in their 20s and 30s and under 40 that do not want to move to Cape Cod because they can't afford it.
Yeah, so let me just repeat so the folks on Zoom can hear what you're saying. So there's a gentleman in the audience who's basically saying, like, when are we going to get to solutions? And we've been talking about the same things for a long time, and the problem's only gotten worse, and wondering about those solutions and how is this different? Yeah, thank you. All right, so that's the first kind of general goal. And we listed in the goal, which you can see in full on this handout, we listed some specific types of housing that would be part of that goal. And so we would be including senior and intergenerational housing, year-round rental units, year-round ownership units, year-round supportive housing, year-round workforce, so everything's year-round, except for the seasonal workforce housing. So that's all listed. Yes?
Is this 10% for each category?
No, it's 10% of the total housing stock and it would be just you would want to do a mixture of these are all needed housing types. Yeah.
Yeah, and the year-round housing stock.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 10% of your year-round housing stock is the goal. Correct, I'm sorry, you're right. The seasonal workforce would not count. And actually, the year-round workforce, depending on what incomes you're producing it at, if it's 80% of the area median income or less, that could count. If it's anything above that, that would not count.
Okay, so I have the numbers that requested.
Great.
So it would be for 0.5% of the overall housing stock that we have the best estimate for of housing units in 2020, because you don't yet have the final numbers for the year-round housing. But our best estimate is 137 units need to be produced to meet the 0.5%, and then you would double that for the 1%.
So 137 units. So that would give you the 1-year safe harbor. If you produce that within 1 calendar year, and by produce, I don't mean build. What I mean is if you had a comprehensive permit, for example, that was approved by the Zoning Board of Appeals for at least 137 units, that would then count towards that 10% goal. When the ZBA files their decision, if they approved that proposal with the town clerk, that's the day you could ask for those units to count towards your 10%, and that's the day your safe harbor would then start for 1 year. Now, other types of projects are different. If you produce those units through some kind of local initiative that you did through your regular zoning, some special permit you gave, then you actually do need to wait for them to be built and get the occupancy permit, and that's how they count.
We have someone in the online audience asking us to define affordable housing.
Yeah, sure. So I know we're skipping over a lot of these definitions because we wanted to get right to the strategies, but I know it's a little hard when we don't bring people up to speed. So when we're talking about affordable housing that counts in the eyes of the state toward that 10% goal, we mean housing that meets basically four things. Has to be affordable and restricted to households that earn up to 80% of the area median income. And I know you're going to ask me, what is that? So Laura can pull that up as I'm talking.
Sorry.
80% AMI, we just
Oh.
do for a household of 4. So we'll tell you that. The second thing is that it needs to be deed restricted, a long-term deed restriction. What does that mean? That means at least 30 years under most programs. It also needs to be somehow subsidized by a public agency. And sometimes that subsidy comes in the form of technical assistance from the Department of Housing and Community Development, but usually it comes in the form of funding from some state agency. It also needs to be affirmatively and fairly marketed across the region, so you can't say that only Barnstable residents are allowed to go for these units. You can have some local preference, up to 70% of the units, but you need to meet those affirmative fair marketing requirements. And that's essentially it. So that's what we mean when we talk about affordable housing that counts on the subsidized housing inventory. Yes?
What is the definition of a region?
What is the definition of a region? So usually it's your metropolitan area, which would be, in this case, Barnstable County.
And for the income limits to qualify for this deed restricted affordable housing, so 80% of the area median income limit for this region, for a family of 4, would be 86,950 is the 80% limit.
Your
The-
annual salary.
Of your annual salary. And the median household income, so 100% of the area median income for a family of 4 is $108,700. And that's the latest one for fiscal year '22.
Yeah, so
and
hopefully that helps folks understand what we mean when we say what affordable housing is that counts in the eyes of the state. So that's what this goal is about for the most part. Yes, in the back. Well, you have affordable ADU program, and those do count. You get like mini comprehensive permits. I'm not sure you're doing them anymore. Are you still doing them?
The program is still active, but we have not created new units in some time through the program.
So the units that you created in the past should still count. But if it's just a market rate ADU, then and that means accessory dwelling unit, that would not count. It needs to be affordable, and that's why they were going through those. I called it the mini comprehensive permit for these ADUs.
And
Yes.
the term of that program, just for clarification, is the Affordable Accessory Apartment Program, is our mini comprehensive permit program.
Yes, it's not the mini comprehensive permit program. Yes, in the back.
Talk about the affordable housing in the AMI, which I always hear about, the AMI. Somebody that's grossing $108,000, netting $86,950, how much do they figure they can afford a month to spend?
They usually look at 30% of your income, and that would be including any, property insurance, taxes, as well as your mortgage. Yeah. Okay, so the first goal is mostly about trying to get to that 10%. So I guess the question is, how do you feel about it? The frowny red is take it out, which I'll just tell you, to be honest, I can't take it out if you want to make this comply with the state requirements. They want to see that you're trying to get to that 10%. But you may have other feelings about how much you want to emphasize it, perhaps, in the strategies. And so I'm seeing little dots being placed on these emojis, and I think that's showing up on your screen too, yeah. So you can see that right now, is everyone in the room able to participate in this? Seems to be working okay? Yours is stuck on the first. What if you refresh your screen? Yeah, that works. Refresh the screen. Yeah. Awesome, okay. And then, Ryan, are folks online seeming to be able to, you're not seeing any problems
Not seeing any problems.
being reported? Okay, perfect. So it looks to me like there's a mixture of feelings about how much this should be emphasized with, I don't know, it looks like maybe 5 or so people on the greenest one, and then about 5 people on the next green one, so 10 people. And then we have about, looks like about 6 or so folks in the middle, or 7 in the yellow, meaning it's maybe, it needs to be in there, but maybe it's not the highest priority. And then we have one person wants to take it out, which I know we can't take it out, unfortunately, or fortunately, I mean, I shouldn't have a judgment about it, but we can't take it out if you want it to be a qualified housing production plan. All right, and then we have a couple people saying they don't really like it that much. All right, and we're going to have a chance at the end to just talk more about, specifics, commentary, and, have more of a discussion. But let's keep going on. So the next one, and I actually think that first slide should not include the seasonal workforce housing. I think that was a mistake. It really should have been included in this new goal number 2, because this is where we really talk about the need for seasonal and year-round housing options for employees, and for more diverse housing options that are accessible to moderate income. So these are units that probably would not count on the subsidized housing inventory. So they're not that when I said it has to be 80% AMI and have a deed restriction and all that, these are things that wouldn't count towards the SHI, but that you still need in the community. And so that's the focus here. So sometimes people call the first one I was talking about capital A, affordable housing, that can be listed on the subsidized housing inventory. And this one we sometimes just call lowercase a. Did I say I? I meant A. Lowercase a, meaning it's not official affordable housing, but it's certainly helpful and needed in the community. All right, so that's what this is about. And the question is, how important do you think that goal is? So far I'm seeing a lot of greens. I'm not seeing anybody say red, orange, or yellow here, except for 2 people now. Okay, so it looks like for the most part, this goal is even more important to you than the first goal of getting to that 10%. All right, the next one is talking about when new development happens, what are the kind of the characteristics of where it happens and how it happens. Promoting smart growth, meaning, close to services, shops and services, walkable locations, protecting natural resources. So trying to avoid, open space listed as priorities, for example, in your open space plan, and other ways to protect natural resources in terms of water supply and whatnot, is near public transportation and infrastructure, sewer infrastructure, for example, and then is consistent with your local comprehensive plan, which of course is being developed right now. So we don't know exactly what that means at the moment, but the idea is that this plan should really reflect what is going to ultimately happen in your local comprehensive plan. So next question is your feelings about that goal. How important is that to you? So I'm seeing mostly greens, kind of maybe not as many dark greens, but more of that lighter green, and then a couple of the yellows. So mostly it seems like people think that's very important, but perhaps not the highest of importance. And I'd love to hear when we have the open discussion a little bit more about why that's not more important. I'm not saying that's wrong for it not to be important, but I'm just curious as to why folks are feeling that way. All right. 4 is assisting in stabilizing housing and providing housing assistance programs and services to Barnstable's most vulnerable residents. So this is not really about creating housing that necessarily counts on the subsidized housing inventory. It's about, although you could have certain situations where you could have strategies that do create housing that counts. But the idea here is more to really provide assistance and stabilization for the most vulnerable residents in the community. Yes?
Question. So is this for the town to do that, or just to assure that services are available to residents?
It's a combination of looking toward your regional sources that you already have access to. When we get into strategies, we can talk a little bit more about that. But I think the way we wrote it is it's a combination of responsibilities. All right, and so we have especially for those living in inadequate housing conditions, the unhoused population, and at risk of becoming unhoused. So let's see, how do you feel about this goal, number 4? All right. So I'm still seeing a mixture here, but I'm seeing a lot more on that darkest green smiley face than the second green. And then we have we have 4 kind of in the middle in that yellow, but nobody's disagreeing or in the red or the yellow here. Or I'm sorry, the red or the orange. All right, great. All right, 5th goal, preserve local oh, sorry, yes.
Backing up a bit,
Mhm.
what are the downsides of not meeting the 10% goal in terms of penalties legislated, for instance?
Sure. Yeah, the biggest downside is that if there are 40B comprehensive permit applications that the community doesn't feel meets local needs or is placed in a location that you don't feel is appropriate, you have much less ability to deny that application. The Zoning Board of Appeals has less authority to deny and less authority to put, different types of conditions. Most of those, when they get appealed to the Housing Appeals Committee, get overturned in favor of the developer. So that's the downside. Okay, so this one is about preserving your local capacity in the town of Barnstable to implement those initiatives. So your staffing capacity, your funding capacity, as the woman in the back said, what about, regional partners, strengthening working partnerships with local and regional organizations. And so this is really about how you're doing that and the kind of capacity that you have, the money you have available, as well as people power and partnerships. So tell me how you feel about the importance of that. It's funny, I'm getting one a little off the, okay, it disappeared. Did you see that?
Mhm.
All right, so it looks like there's a pretty big mixture here of yellows and light greens, not as many of the dark greens. So it looks to me like there's even more people kind of in the middle on that. All right, so we definitely want to talk about that at the end when we open up for conversation. All right, so draft, the number 6, promote greater public awareness and understanding of Barnstable's housing crisis through continued public education of housing needs, partnerships with housing advocates to build community support for housing efforts and nurture strong local leadership. So how do you feel about that one? Is it working okay? Okay, great. All right. So this one has a lot of mixture here. So we got a lot of yellows and even a couple of the oranges. So this one is a little bit more controversial than some of the others we saw. So we definitely want to talk about why that is. All right, so Laura's going to present, we just have one slide reminding folks what the housing needs are. We're not going to go into all the stats and details. And then Laura's going to go through the strategy ideas that are related to those goals.
So this is really the short version of some of the key findings we found when we did the housing needs assessment. There's a need for year-round units, especially rental units. There's a need for accommodating seasonal workforce. There's a need for housing that's affordable to extremely and very low income people. There's a need for continuing the deed-restricted permanent affordable housing, so that's working toward the 10% overall goal. And there's a need for the creation of smaller units, so primarily less so, this is still an issue in Barnstable. You have more housing choices than in other parts of the Cape, but you're still predominantly single-family homes with, 3 or more bedrooms. And given demographic shifts, larger demographic trends of fewer children, smaller families, more single and 2-person households, an aging population, and then, kind of the singles and young couples and so forth, there's still a need for smaller units and more housing choices around that. And how we wanted to structure the strategies, rather than going through lists 1 through 30, is we wanted to cluster what strategies, the more heavy policy type discussion strategies around the need. So for the need of creating year-round units, especially rentals, we pulled in a couple of strategies that tie to that need to discuss. So strategy number 2 on your handout, but it's considering regulations on short-term rentals to the extent that they impact year-round affordable housing. So we have, short-term rentals, those are your Airbnbs and your vacation home rentals, are minority of your housing stock, but not a significant minority. And we want, there's, different regulations you could put on there, different taxes or other things you could put on there. To kind of control how those happen. So how do we feel about that? Yeah, I see a question in the audience.
In regard to considering regulations on short-term rentals to impact the amount of affordable housing, really it's the landlord tenant laws that stop the landlords from renting it out. They're very in favor of the tenant, and we really need to work on our laws. I have a lot of people that would rent year-round, except if you get a bad tenant, you can't get them out. Costs an exuberant amount of money with a lawyer, about $6,000, going to housing court, and it takes 6 months for forced eviction. I've heard from a lot of people that they would rather do weekly rentals and short-term rentals to avoid the circumstances.
So when we,
Which is sad.
when we get into the comment period, that would be a great point to discuss about the landlord-tenant laws, and if this should be either changed to focus more on that rather than local regulations. But yeah, please hold that comment. I'd love to hear that again when we get into the comment period.
And also, when we get into the comment period, I have a note from the audience that, because they can't hear you speak, I'm wondering if we can have you when we get there, step up to the podium, just so the folks on Zoom can also hear. So, yep, Ryan summarized it for our online audience there. Thank you, Ryan. And I see a more it's spread, but more on the favorable of further regulations of short-term rentals. And do we have, are you able to do, okay, I will. Because right now, did it automatically go through? I didn't activate the.
Yeah, it's working without you doing it.
Oh, okay,
so,
perfect. I won't worry about that then. Sorry.
We're talking about a behind-the-scenes things with the
tech
poll
stuff.
everywhere.
Yeah, great, it works on its own, perfect. Okay, so here's the next strategy to consider. Pursuing a home rule petition, so that's where you have to petition the state legislature to allow you to do this, but to extend Barnstable's residential property tax exemption to property owners that provide year-round rentals. So trying to give a tax incentive to folks who are renting to year-round folks. I see a question in the audience, yes.
Even if the owner is not a resident of Barnstable?
If the owner is not a resident, well, those are details to certainly think about, and we didn't get that specific. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why people are able to put outside the circle, but I think they meant the dark green and that light green, so that's how we'll interpret that.
Yes, and I do see a comment that does matter, whether or not they're Barnstable residents. So that is a consideration that we can shape when we write up the strategy. Okay, so the next one.
And it looks like a lot of people seem to like this.
A lot of them, yes, very positive. Okay, so now we have the need for seasonal workforce housing, and we have a couple of strategies to consider for that need. One is to actually acquire properties for co-living housing for the town's seasonal employees or transitional housing for town employees to live in while searching for a permanent home in Barnstable. So in this case, it's talking just about the town's own employees for municipal or school employees, so your teachers, your firefighters, your police officers, as they're trying to move into Barnstable, having a place for them to temporarily be while they search for a more permanent home. It just, yeah, it could be, it could be, maybe it's a multifamily building with a couple units in it or something, and they're both occupied by new employees to the town, or a small
Yeah,
apartment building.
for seasonal employees, I think the co-living was more focused around the town's seasonal employees. It could be a dormitory style thing, bunk beds, that kind of thing. Yes, Jillian?
Might that also include essential service employees?
Essential service employees like police officer and firefighters, yes, yep. Yep, so it's really both. You might have two different formats depending if they're seasonal employees or more permanent employees. Kind of a wider spread on that issue, a little bit more uncertainty, but generally leaning positive. Okay, so the next strategy is exploring public-private partnerships with the town's largest employers to create workforce and seasonal housing for employees and students using underutilized facilities. So in this case, it might be more of a dorm-style situation, but there's the Cape Cod Hospital and the Cape Cod Community College. Could you have a partnership with some of their buildings that they already have or underutilized spots that they have and work together to have seasonal housing for their workforce, basically. Yep, and much more positive on that. Okay, thank you. All right, so the next need we'll discuss is the need for housing that's affordable to extremely or very low-income people. So a couple of strategies to think about there, 9 and 15. So let's move, go ahead. Yep. Strengthening, so you already have an inclusionary ordinance, which means a requirement to have deed-restricted affordable housing in new developments of a certain size across the town, but strengthening what you already have in your zoning by requiring a higher percentage of those overall units being created be deed-restricted affordable at a variety of income levels. You might also do other incentives, like making the permitting process expedited, so having basically a clock on the permitting process that adds a little bit more certainty to someone doing affordable units to have that process happen a little bit faster. Giving other kinds of relief from zoning or allowing them to build a few more units if those units are deed-restricted affordable, or other kinds of financial subsidies for developments to provide affordable housing beyond what's already required. So if they're making it more deeply affordable to lower income people, you might be able to use some trust funds or something to make the numbers of the costs of the development work to actually create the development. Also establishing, if they aren't able to create the new units on site, establishing what's called in lieu fees, so they have to pay a fee to go toward affordable housing somewhere else in town, but making sure that that fee is comparable to the housing market, because we all know that that's increased a lot recently and can be used to support local housing policy initiatives. So still using it toward affordable housing. Yes?
How is that different from what I might call 40B light?
40B
So the
light?
question is, how is that different from 40B light? Yeah.
So this is very much done in context of your own current zoning. So under allowed current zoning. 40B might be done in an area of town where that wouldn't normally necessarily
I think I know what he's
happen.
getting at,
Oh,
though.
okay.
So some towns, like Dennis, has something I don't know if they technically refer to as 40B light, but it's local zoning that allows affordable housing as a percentage. It's very similar.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just what you already allow under your existing zoning. Yep, it's just deepening the ability or enabling the ability to have more affordable units or a deeper level of affordability in a development, private development. So it looks like there's a little bit more spread here. There's a few folks who really do not like this at all. A few more that are more in the middle, and then the proportion, though, is still positive, with some that are very positive. So kind of a wide spread, but it still looks like leaning on the positive end. Okay, so the next strategy to consider for the lower income folks is utilizing local and state housing grant funds to create a local rental assistance program for eligible households. So if you and then it gives some sources of funding. So these are all shorthand reference for Community Development Block Grant funds, or American Rescue Plan Act funds, or Community Preservation Act funds, or your own Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So there's different pots of money you can use to fund housing assistance programs, and this will be done. It could be done as say a 3-month long emergency basis for someone to stabilize their housing. They might get up to, say, 70% of their rent covered for 3 months, and then it ends. And they have to meet certain requirements around income and assets, similar to what you would do for any kind of affordable housing program.
And then, but this isn't necessarily the emergency. It could be,
Right.
it could be structured differently, too. It could be
be
more of an
structured differently.
ongoing program. So we didn't get into the details of that, but this kind of leaves open a number of different ways you can structure that program. But we just wanted to test if folks even wanted to pursue something like this.
Yes, I see a question.
Different from the state's RAF program and so forth that's already existing
Yes, so
through housing assistance?
that's correct. So the state has their own rental assistance programs, but what we found, at least for example during COVID, you can use sometimes a local program more nimbly than a state program, and sometimes a local program can be used as put a person in place while they, get them stabilized if they're in danger of homelessness, while they apply for the longer-term funding through the state or other opportunities. It is hard I see a note in the comments that it's hard to sustain these programs with local funds, which is why I sort of approached it as it would have to be, there are budgets involved here, so it would have to be you're really only budgeted to help a certain number of local households each year, but it could be used at their disposal for when a case comes up that they could apply for these emergency funds or something like that while they apply for other program assistance, because there's always delays getting into those state programs, and it's quite convoluted at times. So this can help stabilize someone in the short term, is how I was thinking of it. But there are other ways you can also make these programs.
So this is an addition to.
Yes. Okay, so I see still a pretty good range, a little more positive than the last one, though. One person really doesn't enjoy this idea at all, but most people are either in the middle or positive. All right, so now we're talking about the need for deed-restricted permanent affordable housing. So these are going to be producing units that will be eligible to go onto your subsidized housing inventory, and we have 4 strategies for you to consider for this need. The first one is to amend your zoning ordinance to incentivize the development of affordable
assisted or independent living units for low-income seniors. We know that there's a need there to support older adults who are on fixed incomes, may not have the assets available to help support them as they age. So we're incentivizing deed-restricted units, particularly, that might also be age-restricted. You also, of course, want to pay attention to family housing, but for this particular population, you could do similar incentives as for more deeply affordable units. So you could have expedited permitting, you could have density bonuses that would allow them to create a few more market rate units to accommodate more of the affordable units, and other sorts of zoning relief, like you might allow them to build just, slightly closer to the, or slightly less, frontage or setback or something like that. All right, so how are we feeling about that strategy? Okay, so a little bit less positive on that. I think that will be a good one also to follow up on at the end of the session to understand where people are at. There's a lot more spread toward the negative on that one. So we'll come back to that one and maybe have a discussion around that. All right, great. All right, so the next strategy is pursuing the creation of affordable year-round housing on vacant or underutilized land or properties as consistent with the local comprehensive plan. How you pursue them, this could be private land or public land, but private land, you could have putting out an RFP or working proactively with a developer on a project. It could be a so-called local action unit, or it could be, we may have a separate, you should have a separate strategy just for the municipal land as well. So this was targeting more of the private underutilized land. It's also possible for trusts or community to actually purchase land and then transfer it to a developer, sell it to a developer for the creation of for purposes of creation of affordable housing. Okay. All right, mostly very happy about that one. With the fewer in the middle. All right. Now, this is the one that has to do with actual land that's owned by the town. So there are a few properties that the town owns that could be transferred, and there's a whole process of which to do that would have to go through town meeting and everything else, that could be then sold and used to be developed into affordable housing. One is a school, the one in Marston's Mills. There's some land next to the police station that's vacant and could be used. And then there is, this address I think is a little bit incomplete, but it's off of Route 149.
Do you guys know what the property is that we're talking about? Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
And also mostly looks like people are quite happy with this idea too. All right, very good. Okay, so the next strategy to consider around producing deed-restricted affordable units is to create a pre-development or infrastructure relief fund. You can use community development block grant funds or affordable housing trust funds, but basically the goal is to defray some costs related to pre-development. So that might be survey work, it might be planning, architecture type work, it could be assessing wastewater, sort of feasibility of development, like how many units could you even put there, that sort of thing, and or infrastructure would be the actual connection costs. It's a way to partner, sort of a public-private partnership to help incentivize the creation of deed-restricted affordable units. All right, how are we feeling about that one? So much more unsure on this one. Definitely feels like, to me, like there's people need more information on this one to understand how they feel about it. Yeah, that's fair. Okay, and now on our final need that we'll discuss, which is the need for smaller units. 4 strategies to cover. You're hanging in with us beautifully, so thank you. I do see some audience questions too, and but we passed sort of where they are, so we might have to come back to those comment questions in the open comment period, and we can follow up with you. We do see you. It's just a little difficult when we're talking at the same time. So we'll come back to some of those comments in the chat when we get to the end here. So just 4 more to go. All right. So smaller units, 4 strategies. First strategy is considering opportunities for zoning amendments to support greater housing diversity in locations consistent with the local comprehensive plan. So you have your local comprehensive plan will work in partnership with this plan. This plan wants to support that plan. That will have some zoning recommendations, and this is really just wanting to be consistent with that plan and where you're going to be supporting greater housing diversity. Yes.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Does this include tiny houses? Someone in the town told me that Barnstable was not eligible to put tiny houses in our town. Does this include tiny houses, and is that statement correct?
So we have a different strategy that talks about smaller home types, and that's also actually coming up. So tiny homes are allowed in some communities in Massachusetts. So Northampton, for example, has part of their town where they allow for it. There is a appendix of the International Building Code called Appendix Q that you can, but it takes a zoning amendment to allow it, and then you would have to consider where you would like to allow it. And tiny homes are 300 square feet or less. And Appendix Q would mean it would have to have some sort of foundation. It couldn't be one of these that are able to pick up and move, because you would have to have infrastructure. You'd have to have a septic system and things like that to accommodate
But
that.
the bottom line is this strategy does not include that,
Right.
because there's a whole nother one on it, yeah.
Okay, so just in general, yes, being consistent with tiny homes. Okay, there we go. Mostly positive for that one, a little bit of mixture. Okay. The next one is on identifying strategies to support development and redevelopment consistent with the local comprehensive plan. And that really means small, low-density, and village-scaled mixed-use housing and multi-unit housing. So this is really, your local comprehensive plan is going to be looking toward your village centers and where you have sewer infrastructure for where you're going to be putting more mixed-use housing and multi-unit housing. But we also didn't want to put the cart before the horse, because we know and respect that you're in the middle of this local comprehensive plan process. Okay, so generally positive. Some people are not as happy with, I'm sure probably some more of the mixed use development.
feelings.
Mixed
Oh.
feelings, or perhaps the type of housing that they think that will generate. Okay. Then here, speaking of, so we have a couple. So this is about missing middle, living little. These are a couple of jargon terms that we use. But what we're really talking about is oftentimes zoning codes only consider the ends of the spectrum of housing. You have detached single-family homes, and you have the mid-rise big apartment complexes, but there's this whole area in the middle. Like, there's your duplexes, there's some little triplexes, there's some like clustered buildings, there's cottages, there's live-work types of buildings. There's a whole range in the middle, and also living little forms of housing are more of your cottages. They're not necessarily tiny homes, but they're smaller scaled single-family homes. And they might be, 2 bedrooms, or they might be under 1,500 square feet. They're like 1,100 to 1,500 square feet. Smaller condos, smaller apartment buildings. So identifying how you might be able to accommodate those wider variety of different forms of smaller units in your zoning code. Mostly positive, a little bit more positive and sure than some of the others. And a couple of people who really wouldn't want to see that at all. Probably, we can, in the comment period, but yeah, maybe favor more of the single-family homes. Okay. And here we are with the tiny homes. So considering zoning amendments to allow for tiny homes in compliance with Appendix Q of the 2018 International Residential Code, which means it would have a foundation, and consistent with locations identified as suitable in the local comprehensive plan. So this is now, we're talking about houses with a foundation, but houses that are very small, 300 square feet or less. So more uncertainty around this one, although still generally positive. All right, what's next? So what's next is we're going to review the results of this forum with the Housing Committee and discuss any changes we want to make to the goals and strategies after hearing your feedback and more feedback with them and the staff. And then we're going to be revising the plan per that and drafting out narratives for the goals and the strategies. That's going to be released for public comment. And the February 6th, well, that's
Yeah, this gives a mess up. I fixed it on the other slide.
January
So
23rd.
it's actually where it says February 6th, that was moved to January 23rd. So the first slide you saw was correct, and I didn't realize the mistake was repeated here. So that February 6th is not correct, it's January 23rd.
Yes. So then we will be further, vetting the plan and discussing it with town leadership. And ultimately, in early to late March, in March, it would be presented to town council and ultimately to the Department of Housing and Community Development for their review and approval.
So now we just really wanted to have a discussion. I know we were having you hold your comments, but doing the little emoji voting. But now we'd really like for folks to come up to the podium, and you can talk about any ones you want. It doesn't have to be the ones we presented. We've given you the list of all of the ideas that are being considered. You can talk about something that you think is missing. So you can tell us if you liked certain things that you really want to advocate for, if you want to see something, tweaked or changed or refined, or if you have other ideas and then any questions. And we'd, welcome anyone online as well. If you want to speak, just let us know in the, I think you can actually raise your hand. Yeah, so 2 attendees have their hands raised right now. And then, so why don't we take them first? I feel like they've been a little bit, not as much in our eyes, certainly, not that we're ignoring you, but why don't we take them first, and then anyone in the actual room here, we can also take your comments. All right, so I've got Ellen Nossel, and I'm going to go ahead and promote you to panelist, Ellen, and you should be able to unmute yourself, and it looks like you can't put your video on, but at least you can unmute yourself and speak, and maybe just tell us your name and your address, and we'll have everyone who speaks do the same thing.
Sorry, are you able to hear me?
Yes, that's better.
Oh,
Actually, I'm not sure why we're getting the feedback. Do you know?
do you need to unmute me?
Ellen, if you could turn the audio on your computer down, I think that might help with the feedback. We can hear you. We're just getting some feedback when you speak.
Okay, I can be heard? Thank you.
That works, yeah.
I had some comments going into this discussion that, I'm gonna turn that down, please. You know, I took a look at the graphic that comes on the discussion of this upcoming forum. Sorry, I'm sorry, my name's Ellen Nozzle, I live in Centerville. And you see this missing middle housing graphic that comes up, and you know, it is something to consider, and it's something that obviously is used in lots of locations when they're discussing housing strategies, like big cities like you know, Orlando and Raleigh and Toronto and all these other urban settings. I think we have to have a full understanding that, you know, we're being guided by a planning company for this. That same image called missing middle housing showed up on a PowerPoint presentation for Nassau County, New York. And the caption that appeared on that slide said, "What single family housing prohibits." So I think people, except for the 25% of the people who are responding to this survey here in our time together, we're residents here, and we need to know that this is going to have some impact on our zoning laws, and zoning laws are not made, you know, hastily, and they should not be changed hastily. So, I mean, I think a lot of people would agree that there are commercial industrial areas that this type of thing would be suitable for, but once you create something as a statute or a law, it applies throughout the town. This is a Barnstable housing production plan. This is not a Hyannis production plan example. So if you take Centerville, for example, which 12 years ago was described as 85% built, and you want to do some more housing incentive in that area, obviously you're going to be looking at splintering housing lots or building up. And a concept that's been used in the past is called form-based zoning, which really just allows you to build up as far as you want with really no control as to what goes in that building up, whether it's apartments, year-round rentals, or commercial business. So I'm also a little disturbed that the survey that I just took has been closed. I only heard about it a couple of days ago, and I only heard about it because I'm a select few that might have gotten the message about it. So what I'm trying to say is, I think as a town and as a corporation here, you need to have more impact, more input from a large number of people. So I think the town needs to invest in getting the survey out to more people, because we've got those who participated tonight, and again, a quarter of them don't live in town. That should be the primary concern when we're developing any housing strategy at all, is what are the wants and needs of the people who live here? And I think that's very still wanting in this whole strategic plan. That's how I'd sum it up right now.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Let me just clarify a couple of things. So we didn't specify this on the slide, but I don't think the intent of identifying zoning amendments and other strategies to support missing middle housing was meant to indicate it would the same type of housing changes for zoning would apply across the town. I think the idea, yeah, I think, oops.
I'm just saying that once you change, you know, it's a town law. It's not.
Let me explain, and I'm
I
going to mute you
think
because we're
there's
getting
enough evidence to indicate that they
Ellen,
would like to apply this type of thing across the
little bit
villages.
of feedback. Let me just educate folks on how zoning could work. So in terms of the way zoning can work, you could certainly have, if you wanted to, provisions of zoning that would include every, area of the town. But that's actually not that common. Typically, you would want to have certain districts or even overlay districts that you create newly create, where certain land uses like a two-family house or tiny homes or what have you would be allowed. And you could have them be allowed by right or allowed by special permit. It's really at your discretion. And so when we craft zoning amendments, we really look at, well, where in the community would you want to allow this? If you wanted to allow something to be able to be built in any location, you are able to do that. But that's not typically how zoning works. It says in certain districts, you're able to do something. Or you could even create a new district that I would just call an overlay district of certain areas of town. You could also create it so that it meets certain requirements. If the property is X number of acres and is, within, I don't know, a quarter mile of a business area, you can create zoning that specifies that way as well, rather than identifying ahead of time what the exact land area is. Does that make sense, the way that I'm describing this to the folks? Okay. And then did you want to say something about that?
Only that it works in tandem with some of the other strategies, which were all about trying to align with your local comprehensive plan. So the local comprehensive plan is a longer process than this one, and it will have also robust community engagement that's already happening, and that will also help shape where development will be happening in the next 10 years.
Or encouraged.
Encouraged, yeah.
And then the comment on the form-based code, yeah, that's a concept that's really not that familiar in Massachusetts communities. There are a few have adopted form-based codes. It essentially looks at, just so folks know, Ellen is right to some extent, but there's just a couple of clarifications I want to make. So it does look at the form of buildings over the use as being more important, meaning you can control the height and the massing, the number of stories, the way it looks architecturally, how it relates to the street and other buildings around it. But it's really focused more on the form, as the name of it indicates. And it focuses a little bit less on, well, how many units can you fit within that form, as an example? Or can you do mixed-use commercial, et cetera? Focuses a little bit less on that. Okay.
And the survey that we put out, it has been open for about 6 weeks or so. And unfortunately, we really did have to close it at this time, just to be able to move forward with the next phase of the project. But we did receive 315 responses, and we're going to, summarizing that, and we'll be including that feedback as a part of the plan too. So that's, so it's, we try to leave it open as long as we can. But there are, I'm sure, other moments to be able to engage in the local comprehensive plan process around housing as well.
Great. All right. I have someone else here online, Eileen Elias. Talking is permitted for you if you'd like to address the group.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My question has to do, that's very Cape specific, and it has to do with two questions. One is in the assessment of the Cape, et cetera, and possible areas for housing, and talking about zoning, no discussion that I've heard, or even in the survey, about the unique land on the Cape. And here I'm talking about marsh and et cetera, where I know, and I happen to live in the Barnstable area, there has been, however you may call it, housing going up that is built off on marshland. And it is a concern on how we're looking at how much land might be available and how much environmentally is going to possibly lead to issue. The second question I have is, there's always been what I would call a Cape Cod principle, that you can't differentiate low cost, medium cost, higher cost housing. And that is, the housing is there. And the worry that I have, especially when we're talking about density, is that we create a whole, you take away that Cape Cod factor that I just identified. So those are the 2 points that I wanted to raise.
Thank you, Eileen. So I think the point was mostly around being very cautious of where development would occur, looking at environmental effects and the important natural resources, how sensitive the Cape is. Thank you. Appreciate your comment.
Yes, and we do have a section in the housing production plan that does talk about environmental conditions, constraints, and all the wonderful resources you have on the Cape that you want to protect.
All right. Next up is Robert Schulte, or Schult. I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Schult? Schulte. You can go ahead and unmute if you'd like to speak. Oh, he disappeared from my screen. I wonder if he lost connection. If he comes back, I can promote him again to panelist.
You got me now?
Oh, you are here, and you can share your video. Great. Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. This is Bob Schulte, live in Centerville. Couple of comments. My wife and I attended the first session back in September, and one of the discussions that we had, or I mentioned, was the fact that, the focus seems to be on, build, build, build. There continues to be very little discussion about, how we better utilize our existing housing. There's a passing reference to regulating some of the short-term rentals, which even our housing advocates have finally acknowledged that the investors buying homes and taking them out of our housing stock is an issue, but our town hasn't had any interest in wanting to regulate short-term rentals in any meaningful way. The passing of some sort of an exemption for those who want to rent year-round is a great idea. I think there needs to be a focus on people who own the property being residents. But again, my concern is, you're looking at an issue with housing supply, and you're only addressing increasing the supply, not how do we better utilize the existing supply. So I just frustrated to see that kind of lack of as you consultants say, all the tools in the toolbox aren't being considered here. My other question is, and I'll echo some of the comments by one of the previous speakers about zoning amendments. I think part of the concern you have is there's a large part of the residents in the town that just don't have a high trust factor with the town leadership and those that have been responsible for some of the zoning changes and amendments. I'll give you an example. The Captain's, I think it's called Captain's Row homes over off Pleasant Street. That was a large project that the town made a lot of. I think there was a regulatory agreement perhaps, or zoning amendments, and my wife and I attended the local comprehensive planning coffee hour with one of the counselors and some of the folks. And even there, one of the counselors admitted, yeah, that didn't turn out the way we hoped. The plan was to create more of our, attainable and missing middle housing. And we ended up creating a bunch of units that we have parking issues. We haven't even rented them all out, and they're all asking rents that are way above what we thought they were going to rent. It's those kind of things that happen when you start making zoning amendments and changes that citizens are fearful of. So I just have the same reservations that many of the other speakers and citizens have when you start making zoning amendments. My responses to a lot of the questions tonight were yellow because I don't think we have enough information on some of these issues. And when you start talking about passing zoning amendments, I just think you're opening up Pandora's box. So.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, so I think the gist of the comment was that he'd like to see more focus on utilization of existing housing stock in the strategies. So that's something that we can take as a suggestion and talk with the Housing Committee about other ideas. And then the second was thinking about the unintended consequences of zoning. And when you're making zoning changes, to really think through all the scenarios and how people can interpret the zoning. Thank you.
Jen, can I make a quick comment on that, which I think it's a timely comment? regarding better utilizing existing properties to create affordable units, you don't necessarily have to build to create a new deed restricted affordable unit. You just have to create a new deed restriction. So there are ways to create our affordable housing supply without having to build, and I think that's, should be an important component of this plan.
Thank you. All right, I have one more on Zoom right now, and then we can come into the room. So Frank, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Nijedik, please correct me if that's not how you pronounce your name. You can go ahead and speak. You should have the ability to unmute, Frank. There you go. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Hopefully, you'll be able to unmute so you can talk. Okay, I'm not sure. Frank, if you get the ability to unmute, please go ahead, and then we can take your comment. All right, but let's go on to the folks in the room until hopefully Frank will be able to speak in a little bit.
Anyone participating through the webinar via iPhone, *6 is how you unmute yourself, if that's helpful.
Okay, so we have, if you want to just come up to this podium and speak into the mic, thank you. And just state your name and I guess the area of Barnstable that you live in.
Hi, I'm Brian Hughes of Hyannis. Rather short comment. On several of the questions you asked, I had to put down the yellow icon. And the primary reason is that, well, I thank you for offering all these different alternatives. Very well, good presentation. For several of them, I found that I put myself in the shoes of a developer who perhaps didn't have our best interests at heart, and how do I game this? And I could see in several of the cases where you offered choices that, gee, I could game it that way, or I could game it this other way. I'd appreciate it if you could tighten those choices up before the final report, because I think it opens itself up to potential abuse down the line if you're not careful. Thank you.
So too broad, not getting back at that unintended consequences
Exactly.
comment. Okay, thank you.
Same thing as Bob said.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? Yes, please come up.
Hi, I'm Tim. I don't actually live in Barnstable, but I work for the Regional Housing Agency, Housing Assistance Corp. So we do work with a lot of people in the town of Barnstable and surrounding areas. I wanted to just say, you hit the nail on the head. I think in terms of a lot of these things need to be tightened. That's kind of what I was thinking along the lines, but I really do like a lot of what was said here. Some of these things I think we kind of have to squeeze a little bit, especially like the tax incentive for the landlords and stuff like that. I think, if we could just squeeze them a little bit to maybe make it so they can't be abused or loopholed or anything like that, I think we'd probably have something really, golden here. But I wanted to just speak on a couple of things that I noticed in the presentation. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up number 4 here on the housing plan about the inadequate housing additions, the at-risk folks. That's something that is very dear to me because I lead a team, boots on the ground, looking for these folks, looking for vulnerable populations, homeless individuals. I mean, just before this meeting, I was actually just walking out here and right in front of our bandstand checking on the individuals, because that's just part of my job, making sure that everybody has what they need. And one thing that really stands out to me is how this population in general has moved from what we consider homeless, hardcore. Maybe you think they have substance use, maybe you think, down on their luck, something like that. It's really moved more towards people that just can't afford to live here. And I want to wrap strategies number 4 and 14 into this here. Strategy 14 is the independent living for seniors, and 14 is co-living for town seasonal employees. I just actually sat in another meeting maybe a couple weeks ago at a town that had a proposal for it for workforce housing. Now, there's quite a few definitions of workforce housing out there, but the definition that they were sort of rolling with was that the folks that they can come and live in. And what struck me is the folks that came to speak at this meeting and for this proposal, introduce themselves as, I'm a restaurant owner, I have 4 restaurants, I have this, I own the motel. And most of them had a very common thing. I can't find people to work because they just don't have a place to live. That is true to a bone. But I do want to caution that it could be a symptom that we're not seeing of the fact that we don't have housing, the fact that we don't have enough affordable housing. We have to build this because we don't have enough inventory. And I really do zone out that specific one because I feel like if we have a good HPP in place and that we're meeting our goals, we don't actually have to work on that. The workforce will just come and be able to live here, make a wage, make a living, start a family, all that fun stuff. And I really want to emphasize number 4 here because the big one here is affordable living for low-income seniors. One thing that we are seeing a lot is we can really get people help, but the choices, especially for people who are handicapped, are so limited. You know, folks come to us and says, I'm in a wheelchair, I'm on a walker, I need oxygen 24/7. And when your only unit is on the 2nd floor and you can basically reach one arm out and touch one wall of your bathroom and the other to your shower, it's not really a unit that's good for that kind of thing. I made that case earlier about that 10% of, doesn't really include, because I don't really want to see 100, if there's 174 units is the goal, maybe 5 of those are handicap accessible. I feel like 10% would be a good thing too. But I really want to drive those points because I really do feel like this is a great plan. You guys really do put a lot of effort and time and care into it. Like I said, a couple things I think we can tighten up a little bit and do better on. But I really want to focus on, we just need the housing. And, we're chasing symptoms right now. We're chasing symptoms of our workforce. The folks that are working on Main Street can't live anywhere. Well, maybe that's just a symptom that we just don't have enough. And then, we can reuse our buildings, we can reuse our territories, and maybe amend our zoning laws tastefully to utilize that kind of thing so that folks can live here, make a wage, and not have to be targeted so that, the owner of the restaurant doesn't own their building or the town doesn't own their building, That's just my thoughts on feeling. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Who else would like to speak? And it looks like one more hand is raised on Zoom as well. So, please. No, you can go first, and then we'll take Elena.
Hi, I'm Felicia Penn. I live in Hyannis. Thanks for doing this. I was at the September thing, too. One of the strategies you might want to consider adding is one that defines the town's role in being proactive and encouraging year-round, I call it, this is small A affordable, but I call it paycheck sustainable housing, with local preferences, meaning Barnstable County. There was no mention of eminent domain as a tool. This can be done many times. It doesn't have to be hostile. It can be friendly. And you mentioned that you work with other towns on the Cape. I'm in awe with Eastham, Harwich, Orleans, Wellfleet, Brewster. Brewster was the first, and the rest are falling right in line. Truro now also. Tiny little towns with hardly any commercial tax base, yet they're standing up, they're securing the properties, they don't have sewers, they're putting in the correct wastewater facilities, the correct drinking water facilities, et cetera, checking the traffic patterns, and they're building the housing that they know they need, because what they're doing is they're looking at their housing production plans, and they're saying, we need X amount of this for this population, X amount of that for that population. My concern is, and I have no idea how to get this done, unless maybe we make tax incentives and other incentives for streamlining zoning and things like that, only for those who exceed the minimums and not make it a free-for-all. Because just for somebody to go out and build something and get all these tax incremental, incentives doesn't make sense to me. I mean, they're just doing what they're supposed to do, and they're making greater margins. I know that the percentages have gone up, but if you're in retail or restaurant, or you're selling food supplies or something like that, you're making like a 2 to 5% margin, and builders are making considerably more than that. I'm not putting them down. They employ a lot of people. They do great things for the communities mostly, but it's just a different business, and that's the way it's ranked. So I think we should focus incentives on people who exceed and do greater things. I agree with was it Ryan who spoke before this? I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Tim. Oh, I wasn't listening. Sorry, Ryan. I agree some of your strategies need to be split up. Some of them are kind of mushed together, especially number 9. I think the first sentence could stand on its own, and the rest of it, we kind of already can do this in certain parts of town, particularly Hyannis. So that's not new necessarily, but I see them as 2 different goals in my mind. They're not necessarily related. Number 15, I'm concerned it won't happen because it probably requires more human resources in the town, and that's the local funding to create local rental assistance programs, et cetera. I think it's a great idea to have more money out there in a certain percentage or a certain number that the town itself can affect, but my concern is that it would never take place because of the human capital that's involved inside versus partnering. Maybe they would have to partner with housing assistance or whoever to do that program.
Yeah, I was just going to say, would you feel differently if the town
No.
allocated the funds to another regional agency?
Third party,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah, to do the
qualified party,
administration.
not
Yeah.
at all. I would feel differently because I support the concept greatly. That's pretty much all I have, I guess. There's probably a lot more I could talk about, but no, none of this really addressed the homeless situation, and I really feel that that's more of a social service, mental health issue than anything. It doesn't mean that they don't need to be housed. I'm all for housing people and getting going. I love reading articles of what other areas do when they try to transition people off the streets, out of the woods. Some people will not sleep in a motel room. I mean, they refuse to do so, so they have certain issues, obviously. But I hate it when people look at them as criminals just because they can't afford a place to live. I think it's horrible. And all of that right now, I think, is on our social service agencies and our existing housing consortiums on the Cape. But talk about starter housing, we don't have any on Cape Cod. Whatever we used to have is long gone. And I am horrified big time at all the real estate investors who do take the houses off the market. Our problem is not unique to Cape Cod. It's just unfortunate that we're surrounded by water, so we don't have any other place to go to on any other sides of us, so we stick out here by ourselves. It makes it more extreme, but it's national. I mean, Columbus, Ohio is having the same problem. I mean, everybody's having the same problem, no matter where they are. So it's a national problem, and it's because of the value of real estate in money. It's always follow the money. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I have Elena Kramer here. Elena, I'm going to go ahead and promote you to a panelist and allow you to talk. So hopefully that will work this time. Elena? Are you there, Elena?
See, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. My name is Elena Kramer. I live in Centerville. And I was very interested in this meeting for my own interest. I've been trying to get affordable housing for over 4 years. I am disabled. I am income restricted. I have lost my Section 8 voucher because I could not find an affordable unit to move to. This is devastating for me. To hear the plans and still not hearing, you know, if anything is actually going to become, because it's been taking so long to do something about this. And I know I have a roof over my head now, but knowing that other people don't. And I'm not too far away from becoming homeless myself because my lease is coming up and I can't afford the new hike. So it's very difficult to think that there's really not a plan for any kind of affordability that's going to happen anytime soon. And it's really hard to hear. I don't know what they can do on the Cape because I moved here over 40 years ago. And I don't want to see the Cape lose their beauty from all these little apartments and complexes going up. But then again, I'm on the other end of the spectrum and I don't know what else you can do to fix that. So
Yeah,
that's
thank
all
you.
I have to
First,
say.
I just want to say I'm so sorry to hear about your situation, Elena, and I'm really grateful that you are here tonight and took the time to speak up. And I do hear your frustration about the urgency of the need and how long it seems to take to get these things, started and addressed. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. Okay, good luck with everything. I wonder if we can, you probably know of the resources, but I wonder if we can, maybe post the list of resources that the town, I think, probably has on their website in the chat, just in case. Yeah, I figure you probably know.
Applications
Yeah.
in the last month.
Okay. I just didn't want
And
to
I'm
leave
by
you hanging.
myself, and a lot of the new units that are available and older units are 2 bedrooms or more. And because the need is so great, every room has to be filled. So I cannot have anything more than a studio or a 1 bedroom, and there's nothing available other than the new units that went up in Hyannis that are $3,000 a month. I can barely afford to pay $1,200 a month. Yeah. It's just, it really is a great need, and it's devastating to think that it's not going to be fixed. Yeah. It really is. We're in such a bad place right now.
Jen?
Yes, Ryan.
So I'd like to just thank the caller for making that comment, because this highlights a comment that I hear a lot about people losing their Section 8 vouchers because they can't find qualified units in the time frame necessary to maintain the voucher. And I think this is something that this plan can really look at in terms of a rental subsidy program to help bridge those time frames and have a more near-term meaningful impact for people. So I think it's an excellent comment to receive, and I think it's something that this team can look further into.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you.
All right. Are there other folks in? I don't have any more hands raised on Zoom. Yes, in the back.
Hi. I'm not sure I need this mic because my voice is so loud. My name is Cindy Lee Cordero, Caldwell Cordero, and I live in the town of Hyannis. And I can tell you, first of all, I sell real estate for a living, and I've been doing that since 1983 on Cape Cod. And I can tell you about 30 stories that is just like this woman that just spoke. We need to do something now. Unfortunately, I also managed a 12-unit apartment building in Hyannis. It was a lodging house and a 4-plex out back. And people just can't afford to pay their rent. I mean, you put one ad in, you get 40 responses. But as far as these Section 8 vouchers, it takes 8 years to get one from the state, and they're discriminated against. As soon as they tell somebody how they're going to pay, that landlord doesn't want to do anything. And I made a comment earlier, and I know, it's hard enough to do this study, right, and get some housing in here, but landlords have actually said to me they would rather do short-term than year-round. And it's because the laws are unbelievable. I've had to do 2 forced tenant evictions this year, after the people already got help in 2020 and in 21, because there just are bad tenants. And unfortunately, when you have to pay $6,000 out of your pocket and you don't have any income for that rental, these owners that live out of state, they do not want to rent it again. You know, and it's very, very tough. The Massachusetts laws are really, not that we shouldn't protect the tenants. There are bad landlords, but I don't see tons of slum landlords on Cape Cod. If we're talking about different areas, I know of some in different states and in the cities, but it's very hard. And we also need 3 bedrooms and 4 bedrooms. And I'm kind of concerned about everything going into the affordability, and they're deed restricted, because I think you stop people from wanting to do something with their properties. You know, there's a lot of year-round people that make $85,000, $100,000, $125,000, which is, you know, I know it takes $28 an hour to live here on Cape Cod, right? To be able to afford something. But there's even people that make that kind of money, that if they wanted to go build something on their land so their mother could be there, they are restricted with these zonings and so forth. There's so many stories of people that are just under the radar. It's just amazing. So I think we need to do it, and we need to do it now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? Oh, sure.
Under one of the redevelopment strategies that you had, I think every time a commercial property, let alone vacant properties, obviously, but a commercial property goes through some sort of renewal or redoing, for example, Home Depot's reinventing itself over there, I think they need to do top-of-shop housing. And I don't know if that discussion ever came up with any negotiations with them, but what a lost opportunity if we don't tell them that, you know, XYZ incentive for you, you're going to go and, you know, take over the store next to you, and you're going to do this and do this and that, and while you're reconfiguring, we want 12 units up there, XYZ, you know, whatever it is. So I think that can go into some category of, you know, something that happens automatically under redevelopment in commercial areas. I know that Hyannis Main Street's been zoned for top-of-shop housing since 2008, 2006, something like that. Nothing ever happened. One project. That's it. Way back when. Nothing ever happened. I don't know why. It's expensive. That's why. But I'll stop.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Tracy Shaughnessy. I live in Hyannis. One of the strategies, I kind of see it partially in other strategies, like looking at underutilized properties, but would be identifying properties that can be redeveloped. So for me, I'm thinking of, you know, multiple condominium apartment complexes on West Main Street that have probably existed late 70s, early 80s. They were built as 2 stories. How great would it be if those could all now be 4 stories? Because we're staying within the existing footprint. I know a lot of these places are private owned, but maybe looking for strategies to incentivize them to maybe redevelop some of these properties. I mean, there's condos in Centerville on the corner of Shoot Flying Hill Road and 28, which, again, I believe are 2 stories, and in Osterville as well. So maybe looking at some of the existing things that we have and redeveloping it to add an additional story, add additional units, that kind of thing. And I think it's a great idea to attempt to incentivize private property owners to rent to year-rounders by giving them a residential exemption, because under Mass law, there really is no incentive to be a year-round landlord. I mean, it's just the way the law is. It's so tenant-friendly. you could go a year without any rent and lose the property, and how does that benefit us? So I think it's important to try to incentivize people to rent year-round.
Thank you. Yes?
My name is Karen McGuire, and I live in Hyannis. And I just want to say in summary that I really think, I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and I really think that the town has a wonderful opportunity to take a leadership role in doing some of the things that Tracy talked about, Brian talked about, Felicia talked about, what we're going to do with the homeless people. I really applaud this, but I think the key is the problem is so real right now that I think the town really needs to step up. And by doing that, I know you're going to have the support of the people in the community. So thank you very much for what you're doing and for this meeting tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? There's no more hands on Zoom right now, so it's just the folks in the room if you have any other thoughts you want to share before we close out. All right. Well, thank you. Ryan, did you want to say any words as we close out?
Thank you, everyone, for hanging in there with us tonight, and for all of your comments.
Yeah, appreciate you being here. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and end the Zoom meeting.
Recording stop.
Okay, we're done.